Welcome to Let's Talk Para, the podcast where we talk about all things para sport. I'm Yasmina Isa, a para badminton player, and I'm thrilled to bring you inspiring stories from athletes, coaches, researchers, and everyone shaping the para sport movement. If you're passionate about para sport or just hearing about it now, join me each episode as we delve into the world of para sport. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Para. Joining me today is Jack Clarke. Jack is the current performance scientist at GB Wheelchair Rugby. Jack, thank you so much for coming.
No worries, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here.
So your position in wheelchair rugby has recently started, but your journey in para sport started a few years back. So how did you get into para sport?
Yeah, and so I guess about 3 years ago it all started. I was doing my degree in strength conditioning, masters in strength conditioning at Loughborough, and that's where it all started. I originally came from the west of Ireland, and I was doing an undergraduate degree in athletic rehabilitation therapy. So I thought I wanted to go down the injury and prevention route and working as a physio, but I then transitioned into strength conditioning. And then at Loughborough we had a great lecture from Vicky Tallfree and Nick Diper, I think you've had on the podcast already. So they came in and it was just 1 3-hour lecture. That was all we had in our degree, but for me it was enough. That was my first introduction, and I just left there wanting more, and it created a space for me where you needed to be creative, you needed to be very different in your approach to how you do things, but the principles still remain the same. So from there I just started to look at what my opportunities were, reached out to Nick, and we started connecting with British para athletics. During COVID it was difficult, but we managed to do some great work around the neural side of things, neurological disorders, and we then grew on to doing a project with that for my masters. After that then Lightning Wheelchair Bassketball was created in that January, and that's where I first got into my professional career within disability sport.
So Lightning Wheelchair Basketball has been going for about 4 years now, I think.
Yeah, it's just about to start its 4th season.
Yeah, and so this is the first, like one of the first kind of like professional leagues in the world for women's wheelchair basketball. Yeah. So you were the S&C coach for that team, and that was like your first para S&C role, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I was the strength and conditioning coach with Lightning Wheelchair Basketball. It was a fantastic league. It was the first semi-professional women's para sport league ever across the world, and it was a real privilege to build Lightning and work alongside George, and we created a really amazing team. Great group of women, and through that it was my first time working within the para space, but also as it was a new team we had a lot to learn together. So yeah, it was a lot of learnings. We went 3 seasons while I was there, won 3 championships, so it was a lot of success, but to get to that success there was a lot of learning, a lot of step backwards to understand the best way forward, because the real roots of that league was to limit the gap between recreational to elite, and provide opportunities early on for women within a wheelchair basketball space, which I think is a common trend across all para sport, is that gap, and we'll talk a little bit about it later. But the main goal was to give opportunity early in a young athlete's career, to then allow them to make the most of it and hopefully reach that GB international standard. Yeah,
because a lot of the athletes actually on the Lightning team were still like quite young, weren't they?
Yeah, and that's where we really, we were most proud was, yes, we had 3 championships and we started off with a great roster of very experienced athletes, but if you look at our 3 years within that, we got so many young athletes their first international cap.
Yeah.
We experienced that environment very early on, and I think George led us in as a staff to create that atmosphere, that feeling for the athlete.
Yeah.
So people coming in at the age of 17, starting their university degree alongside Lightning, gave them that space then to, grow as an elite athlete, which I think for parasport is something that is new but very much needed. And yeah, it was a real great opportunity to be at the starting point of that to mould it and really learn from what the right and wrong steps are.
Yeah. So that was right after you finished your master's in strength and conditioning. So you'd obviously taken all the theoretical elements of things, but when it came to implementing, did you feel that your master's degree prepped you for working with para athletes, or was there a lot of stuff that you had to do on your own to teach yourself?
Yeah, a question I get asked a lot is, what's the main difference between para sport and able-bodied sport? And to me as a coach, on the surface, yes, there's a difference, but the principles are the same. You're still trying to develop the physical characteristics of the individual in front of you to the best of your ability, in a safe space, through appropriate means. So none of that is specific to para sport. That would be in any sport that you work with, across any space. So the masters taught you those principles, but I think what is highlighted in para sport is the need to be creative, the need to be understanding and build relationships. So although those are factors that are still prominent in able-bodied sport, in para sport that's your bread and butter. The need to understand the person in front of you, to work with that person, is so important for you guys to get the most out of what you're trying to do together. So yeah, I guess the masters gives you the theory and the principles of what's happening, and what you need to think about, but the execution is quite unique, and that's where I suppose the magic happens. With as a practitioner, that's what gets me excited, because that's where that relationship is so important.
It's interesting you mentioned that. So Nick, actually, on the podcast, he said the difference is what we should be chasing after, is what makes it so special. So you talked about building relationships with your athletes. That was like the main thing that helped you develop as a coach. So what kind of learnings did you have from your athletes when it came to prepping their S&C program?
Yeah, and the way I think of it, and especially as a guest in that world, as an able-bodied coach, I was in a place that I couldn't necessarily relate, but it was my duty to understand.
Yeah.
I needed to put myself into a position where I knew, what that person would feel, or what they needed to adapt, how we needed to approach certain things. So again, a lot of people will ask me, what is needed to get into para sport? You don't need a medical degree to understand the different disabilities that you might see, but you do need an open mind. You do need to be an individual that can connect with people. So for me, that was kind of, part of my personality, was loving the chat and loving connecting with the people. That's why I'm in sport. I think that's why a lot of people are in sport. So again, it's not different, but working with athletes and them being open-minded to me as well was such a gift. So Lindsay Spears, which was a great athlete to work with. She was still a well-experienced basketball player, but new to that elite environment, and we had a great relationship, and just understanding how her body would grow and develop within the gym space, and how I could then create that gym space to make sure it was as adaptable and universal for her as possible. And I only get that through her. You don't read that, you don't learn that in a book. You need to go out there and talk to the person in front of you. So yeah, for me, some of my learnings is you need to have a basic understanding of that disability. You need to understand, for example, spinal cord impairment. You need to understand, the origin of it, and the typical presentation of it, to have a conversation. But the expert is the person in front of you, and that's where that relationship is so strong, is to go around that discovery. Because again, in my experience, a lot of the people were new to that gym environment, so they necessarily didn't know all the answers. So that was almost the enjoyable part of the job, was you guys learned together. Whether they were experienced, completely new to the gym, you could still build that level of trust quite quickly, because you had to. Just because the nature of it was, it's a gym space, they're not always hugely accessible, so how are you guys going to get the best out of each other? Which I found hugely enjoyable in that space. Again, it's present in all sport, but I think it's highlighted and really put into the centre in para sport.
Yeah, because I think no matter how much you research on a disability, everyone's different. Like, two people can have, say, like cerebral palsy, but they'll like act completely different because there's a whole wide range of disabilities within the disability. So you're definitely right. The athlete is your first point of contact in that. So when it comes down to making the gym more accessible, then what kind of simple things were done, or what kind of things were actually done to make the gym more accessible that maybe someone who's not involved with para sport won't realize that this is like some of the stuff you can do to make it more accessible?
Yeah, that was a great part that we as Lightning Wheelchair Basketball, when I was working with them, had that almost that experience to challenge Loughborough and power-based gym. Loughborough's, the gym was accessible, but it only ever really worked with maybe a small number of athletes. It never was challenged with a whole team of 12 to 15 chair users. So for me as a practitioner, was making sure that the environment was correct and it was suitable.
Yeah.
And that's not just the equipment, but the way I could program sessions and make sure that they were thought out with that in mind. So again, for me as an able-bodied individual, I couldn't relate, so I had to ask, I had to understand and start to figure out what was needed to change and make that a really seamless gym session. So I guess the easy answer as a coach is ask the person in front of you, get into their shoes, and I would encourage you to start from the car park. As soon as they get out of that car, what is their experience? So as someone that can, me personally, I can walk from the car park, I can get through the doors very, very easily, I can get through the turnstiles. But again, you need to understand that's not always the case for everyone that comes into the gym and into the building. So that's where I'd encourage you to start. Not just that gym environment, it's the whole journey from car to gym, and then as soon as they leave, what's that journey?
Even the bathrooms, really.
Absolutely. How many changing facilities are there? If we have 5 to 6 wheelchair users and we've only got one showering space, well, you've got to make sure that you take that into consideration. So small things like that go a long way. Things almost, the gym environment, limiting, again, it depends on the person in front of you, but for example, if they're a day chair user, how many transitions from chair to bench are you asking them to do? How much time is spent moving around the gym? Can you coordinate where your exercises are to make sure it almost transitions into the next one? So for me, early on, I had med ball activation, then bench press, then cables, then back to pull-ups, and they were all around the gym. So all it needed to do was maybe adjust where I was doing those exercises and the order to do them, so that you'd go from one space and then you'd end in the other rather than going back and forth.
Yeah.
A big part of it is that usually when you work with an able-bodied sport such as cricket or swimming, they've had a lot of resource from a very early age, so they may have been in that gym environment. But I guess within para sport, resource at an early age isn't always a given.
Yeah.
That's where I think a huge amount of development is going to be in the next few years. But I had athletes that might have been playing for 6 years but have never been in a gym environment, so making sure that it wasn't too daunting, that when you're surrounded, in our environment we had multiple teams coming in, putting some consideration into, do my athletes have to go through 20 rugby players and then 20 hockey players 5 times in the gym, which it does take that extra bit of pressure on. So for a coach, you can have a big impact on the environment that you train your athletes in. More from I suppose a structural perspective of the gym, the equipment that you have. Power base was great. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. And what we were really fortunate to do is to test it and to show where it needed to develop and grow. So then when we started to create the new gym, the base, that's now base, it was fantastic to see the management of that development team ask us and understand what the athletes needed, which to me, again, hindsight is 2020, but once a decision is made and if it needs to be changed, it's quite costly and it's difficult to do.
Yeah.
But if you have those conversations before you create that infrastructure, before you create that building, it's usually quite a cost-effective way of making a gym accessible. So the team were fantastic up in that management side, and it was a great learning opportunity for me to understand how to go about that.
Yeah.
We worked with Black Box, who were our partner, and they were amazing at wanting to understand, wanting to know what could be better. And rather than it being an accessible space, it was a universal space. Something that Nick Diaper spoke to me early on is, if you have 20 able-bodied spaces and 5 wheelchair spaces, you always rely that you have 5 wheelchair users every day or every year. But that, again, it's not efficient for the entire gym setup. So what an alternate way of thinking that Nick taught me was make it universal, so it doesn't matter who you have at any given day. Every space is capable of taking in those individuals.
Yeah, because like you said, you had 12 athletes, so if you had 5 spaces and 12 athletes, that's not gonna work. So I remember looking at it now, it was really simple stuff and I think it helped not just disabled athletes but anyone in general, because they, like, for example, the racks for the weights, it was a bit higher, so it was like waist length for a non-disabled person, and then they could just, rather than bending over, they could just do that. But it's also the perfect height for a wheelchair user, so it is truly universal in that sense, and that's what makes it, I think, probably one of the most accessible gyms at the moment.
No, I think for sure. The stuff that we did that was to make it more accessible for disabled people, like you said, it makes it more accessible for everyone. And that's why I think it's so important when you are making these decisions as a practitioner or as an individual that is creating a gym space, that you do ask multiple perspectives. And I think many people are good at it, but it's not just a tick box exercise. You really can get a lot of effective ideas that make that space so much more enjoyable for everyone. One example was we had those free weight benches that sit on the floor. They're always really narrow, but for a wheelchair user or someone with a spinal cord impairment, it was helpful to have that bench wider to create a better kind of base of support, to limit the amount of mobility, or to encourage the amount of stability that you had. And something that for us was a simple fix. We just increased the width of the bench, increased the width of the kind of the seat post. And at times when I go in to use the gym myself, it's almost the most used piece of equipment by everyone, because it gives more stability, especially if you've got your bigger rugby players in, which are really common in sport. So it was a universal appeal, not just a wheelchair friendly version. I think that mindset can really help create a space that might be limited on cost. So they might not necessarily be thinking, oh, we need a specifically accessible space. Well, why don't you make it all accessible, but universal to everyone? And then, like you said, you can see everyone engaging with it. Yeah,
because I think, like you said, the bench, anyone's using it. And for me, I know personally, like some of the exercises I need to be more to the side, so I need something to balance. And that's like the perfect bench to do that on. So yeah, I definitely agree that it's simple fixes, and starting early on is the most cost effective way, because it's hard to, once you've made the gym, be like, okay, now let's make it accessible, because then that's almost impossible. But having that feedback from people from the very get-go is quite important. So now shifting a bit to you did some work in Ireland, right? So what was what kind of work did you do with Paralympics Ireland then?
Yeah, so obviously coming from Ireland, it was always a passion of mine is to make my experiences effective over there, and I wanted to learn and be a part of that organisation. So Paralympics Ireland, they're a fantastic organisation. The sports director Nasser Russell and the development officer Brian Hughes are really amazing people, as well as all the people around them. So my role with them was just to come in on a short-term basis on their next gen project, which was almost not quite talent transfer or talent identification, but just providing opportunity for all ages and all forms of disability across Ireland. I mentioned earlier that gap between recreational and elite is so big, and something that really stuck out when I met Jason Smith a very well medalled Irish athlete, track sprinter, and his origin was because a high school teacher took the time to coach him and to give him that experience. And what stuck to me was, if they hadn't been so generous with their time, that teacher, if they hadn't been so generous with their time, we would have lost an amazing athlete with an incredible career.
Because he's the fastest Paralympian at the moment.
Yeah.
So
an amazing individual, and it's almost down to chance that he met a coach that wanted to volunteer that time, or a teacher that wanted to volunteer their time. So how can we make sure that there's infrastructure there that signpost opportunity for young Irish disabled kids, and not necessarily them having to make it to the Paralympics? That wasn't the message. It was showing them what they can do, and you can make it to the Paralympics, or you can go out and enjoy and feel like you can be competitive or be challenged, or not necessarily have to be on the bench the whole time, which was a common trend and a common problem across schools in Ireland and the UK. So for me, it was a great opportunity to be a part of that mission, and they've done a fantastic job since. It's now in its second rendition. So yeah, it was a great chance to learn again that grassroots side as well as the elite side. How do you develop that pathway and create opportunity?
I think for disabled people, some of them don't want the Paralympics, and I think that's what a lot of organisations need to realise is, just like non-disabled people, some of them just want to play sport for the sake of playing sport. Could we provide that opportunity at grassroots for anyone to get involved, not at a competitive level, just for the sake of staying active and being fit? And that's where I think it's important that the grassroots is properly developed, because I think at the elite level it's a long journey to get there, but once you get there, there's a lot of support provided. But that journey to get there is when it's the lucky few that make it to the top. So you talked a bit about working in Ireland, but then did you feel, when working here in England, did you feel like a shift in perception around Paralympics or disability from Ireland to England?
I think the cultures are similar. And I guess I didn't grow up in England, so I wasn't really exposed to it at a young age. But in Ireland, very much at a young age, when you see someone in a chair or someone with a disability, you're, told don't ask, don't make an effort, don't make that a difference. That's something that they don't want to talk about. So you're kind of told to not look at it, don't talk about it. Which, now that I'm in the sport and in the environments of disabled people, and it's almost the opposite, I've found, is people want to share and people want people to understand maybe why, or not make such a difference of it. So yeah, I think just how we approach disability is important. Like you said, not everyone has to be a Paralympian, but sport there's such a social element to it. There's such a recovery element that if you've got an acquired disability, it can be such an important part to your rehabilitation process. But then the culture of a country as well, like the day-to-day isn't designed for people with a disability, but a sporting space can be. So it can make someone feel so valued, maybe when they are in a world where they don't feel that it's designed for them. It gives them that ability to, not have their disability as the difference. Because I think growing up, you're thought that a chair that's a big difference. That's something that you need to not talk about and not make a point to look at. But in fact, it's not such a big difference. It's just that happens to be the way someone gets around. So yeah, I guess that was a little bit about my learnings, especially as someone who's not disabled. It took that learning and understanding to relate to those people, and like I said, I won't always have that experience, but it is my duty as a coach to understand and to make sure that I'm always challenging myself in the way I think, and always build that trust and that relationship. So
because you grew up that way, do you feel like when you got that lecture about parasport, did you still have that like when you first got into it, did you still kind of have that perception of fear of, should I be asking this, or did you have that fear because of that's the way you grew up? That's the way many people grow up, not just you.
And in that lecture, a great activity that we did was, they showed someone in a chair, someone with visual impairment, and someone with cerebral palsy, and they said, what is your comfort level with working with that type of person? And for me, it really shocked me because I was like, oh, I don't know how I would go about that. And that's what led that then fascination with it was, why aren't I comfortable with that? So coming into Lightning, I wanted to be respectful but learn, and that's where the relationship came in. You're going to have to work with that athlete's body in ways that they may not have worked with before, or maybe they've not talked about before. So for me, it was trying to find that balance of what was acceptable, but also as a coach, what is needed, and understanding the person and getting to know them makes that process so much easier.
Yeah. So was there a level of uncomfort when that was like when you got those 3 pictures, or was it more of I actually don't know, like which one was?
Probably the latter, or maybe a mix of the both, but more so just like I don't know. I've never been put into that environment, and I guess where we'll talk about is if you're a practitioner that is really excited and keen to move into disabled sport, it's exposure.
Yeah.
Like, put yourself into those shoes and understand those different changes, the different nuances that might need to occur. So yeah, for me it was, I've never worked with someone that's in a chair, but that if I want to be an elite sport, that is elite sport. Like, that's something I need to be prepared for. And again, how the UK system is with the UKSI type, you might not necessarily go into an advertised para sport role, but you could be working with disabled people. So that's the challenge for me at the time, and a challenge for your listeners is, if you don't have that level of comfort, well, how can you start to develop that, or understand maybe why you've got that feeling? Because it is something that can be done. Like, it's, again, it taught me that it's not actually something that you need to be fearful or avoid. You shouldn't talk about something that's not the case. It's actually the opposite. Is have a conversation with someone as if it was, as any other topic. It's something that you can discuss with that athlete, and they feel much more positive that you do, in my experience, because a lot of people, like I said in my past, avoid it or don't want to talk about it. But especially in a gym environment or a sporting environment, it is important for them that the person that is coaching them understands there's a duty of care for that coach.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and I think the assumptions or the avoidance is definitely a lot worse than asking it, even if it's very blunt, but just asking a question, because the response is also going to be very like, what do you need? This is what I need. That's what sometimes like all the athlete needs. So obviously wheelchair basketball, that was Lightning wheelchair basketball, that was your starting point. And then now you shifted more to wheelchair rugby, so you're the performance scientist at GB Wheelchair Rugby. So what does that role entail now?
So I started that role in June, right before Paris, and that role is, I'm starting to learn it, and it is probably going to be forever changing, but ultimately I oversee the strength and conditioning services and the science, the sports science support within the team. Anything physical is usually what I say to the athletes. If there's anything physical, that's usually something that I will take responsibility over and provide them with some guidance if needed.
Yeah. And then, so your team was in Paris and also looking to, for the next games, that's where you come in, because you obviously started in June, so you didn't have much involvement with Paris. So in terms of planning for LA, what's that planning, or what you can share, what's that planning kind of looking like for wheelchair rugby?
Yeah, it was really fortunate to come in right before Paris, although it was very much thrown in the deep end, to see what the team was and where they were at in such a peak condition, ready for such a massive competition. Now that we're planning for LA, again, it's 4 years away, so it's trying to just set that foundation. For me, it's making sure that the communication is there, not only from a player's perspective to staff, but from staff to staff, that us as a staff team have got great communication around what we're trying to achieve, because I'm of the belief that if the staff have got that level of clarity, that the players that'll filter down. So for us, it's making sure that we're on top of those foundations of communications, clarity and purpose. that each day that we're setting out a camp or a competition, that we've got a stepping stone to reach. To sit in a room and say we're going to be gold medalists in LA, it's a great achievement, and that's what we want to strive for, but it can't be our only message. We do need to have stepping stones to get there. So I think a big part of that is making sure that we've got a great depth in player squad. We've got amazing people in the room at the moment, and I think we've got the people together already that we believe in, and we believe that we want to move forward. So yeah, I guess where we may be different to other sports is we almost have to develop from the top down, where that might contrast to sports like cricket, where some of the coaching kids get in schools is almost just as good as the international standard. It's really high level of development from a very young age. But a lot of people within wheelchair rugby might find the sport late in life, or they may come from a club that isn't necessarily built like an elite environment. So for us, it's getting the right people in the room, teaching them those foundations of those behaviours, and from there developing that elite player mindset and the physical characteristics that go along with it.
Yeah, so you mentioned about they get involved with the sport later on in life, and perhaps their club was not like an elite environment. So are there currently could you talk about the pathways currently, so it makes the transition from almost recreational to elite easier?
Yeah, something that was established in the last cycle with GB's Wheelchair Rugby program is their talent program, and that's headed by Stuart McClendon, who's a fantastic individual at seeing potential and providing support when it's needed, and ensuring that we've got that stepping stone process for young athletes or new athletes. So yeah, I think we're now seeing the fruit of that work. We're now getting a room where we've got so much amazing depth and talent that for us, that's what's going to make the difference. The sport is so competitive at the top 5, maybe top 6, that for us, we need to ensure that we've got that range and player depth to ensure that our players are supported, but also can compete through a long competition like the Paralympics, which it's about 7 days across 7. Sorry, it's about 7 games across 7 days, and you really, you can't really let any go. You need to be performing for that much. So for us, it's ensuring we've got the range of players that can play at that standard. But also, we spoke about it earlier, it's opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone on that pathway has to make it. So a big part of our program is ensuring we're developing people as well as athletes, making sure that they are getting a chance to compete and be social, if that's just what they're there for, but also got the opportunity to reach that next level if that's what they look for and that's what they're able for.
Do you think developing the grassroots now could, maybe not for LA, but for Brisbane or the Paralympics after that could, do you think that the level of wheelchair rugby, if countries around the world were to focus on, not even wheelchair rugby but parasport in general, if the grassroots is a focus and people from a young age got exposed, do you see the level of parasport increasing massively in 8 years time, for example?
Oh, absolutely. And it's I've been fortunate to see multiple different environments within disability sport, to be a part of multiple parasport teams, and a common trend is that gap from a recreational, maybe a national level, club level athlete, and the gap between that and the international or Paralympic level is quite big, and is probably bigger than what you might see in able-bodied or Olympic sport. So yeah, I think there are some great studies and great cases of people that are doing that right now. London was a great effect in getting that vision out there, showing people with a disability that you can play and you can go out and compete. The job's not done, but it's developing. So yeah, I think that is going to be an exciting place to look at. That if you're coming into parasport, that's where you really want to keep an eye on, because like you said, if you start that early, the next cycles are going to be even more competitive. And even if you compared London to Paris, the standard
levels is
so high, and I think previously maybe the method or the messaging to someone who had acquired a disability is, oh well, you can be a Paralympian now. That's not the case. You need to earn it. You really need to fight for it. It takes an entire lifetime and a career shift to be a Paralympian, which I think puts that emphasis on the importance and the competitiveness that it now is.
Yeah.
I only see that getting stronger.
I think because it's similar with like Olympic sport. You had, if you look at like swimming times or anything like that 50 years ago and you compare that to now, the level has increased massively only because of the focus, and that's kind of the shift you're starting to see within the Paralympics, within all the para sports really.
Yeah.
So obviously you've worked in numerous roles, you've had a lot of self-learning from a lot of people, or you had to do a lot of self-learning, and you've also got knowledge from a lot of people. So if someone's listening to this right now and they're considering, they're doing an MSc in S&C, or they're similar in the sense that they're a sports scientist, but they don't know if they should get into para sport, what advice would you give them?
I think the number one thing that I benefited from is exposure. Like I mentioned, you can't learn a lot of the things that I was experienced with in a book. You can't listen to just one podcast and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
I think this is a great starting point to understand what is needed, and it's exposure in my eyes. The world of para sport is hungry for volunteers, so don't let that be a restriction.
Yeah.
You know, I think you do need to get yourself involved, go out and find a place that you are passionate about, because it takes someone who's passionate. There's a lot of creativity involved. There's a lot of relationships that you need to build, and you need to think outside the box. A lot of the pathways for an athlete haven't been developed, so in terms of the best practice moving forward. So if you're someone who loves to create and are passionate about developing individuals, that's all it takes to be a great practitioner within para sport. So as long as you've got your principles of strength conditioning, the specifics of para sport is exposure and being able to connect with people. The rest of it will come. So yes, there is a requirement to understand what a spinal cord impairment is or what cerebral palsy is, to have that starting conversation. But my number one recommendation is get yourself out there, be creative, because I can guarantee you now, if you invite me back in 3 years' time, the way I work is probably going to be different, just because it's always evolving. The way it is now, Paris, our level at Paris isn't good enough for even this competition coming, because the game has already changed. So it is a really exciting world to be in. That's what really gets me passionate about it, because it's always so creative and forever changing. But also the people, the stories that you hear, the journeys that people have to get to the place where they are now. It does give you that inspiration as a coach as well. So yeah, no, if you are listening and you do want to get into it, find a way to get in. It might be volunteering to start, but it is worth getting that space, that experience.
And I think the special part is you'd be shaping the movement, like, because there's so much to get involved with. You could be the person who's pioneering something within the movement, and I think that's pretty special.
Absolutely.
That's something pretty special.
Yeah. Every athlete needs a different road. If they've all got the same objective, and even within the team, they may have similar roles, but the way that they execute that role or how they train to master that role is always going to be different. So even if we come to a place in 20 years and parasport is fantastic, it has reached that level, it'll always take a creative person to get involved. Someone that is excited to think outside the box. And I think parasport will always encourage that. I would like to think anyway, just because of the nuances and the individual needs that make it so creative.
So going on to the last part of the episode today, I've asked you to prepare 2 truths and a lie. I've got mine, but according to people, mine are boring. So I'll have you start and I shall guess.
I can. Hopefully they're creative and interesting to look at, or interesting to listen to. But I'll give you 3, and you can decide which one is
Yeah.
truth and a lie. I was once the lead prince in Sleeping Beauty, in a play that was only spoken through Irish, having no experience in acting. I once sailed from Tasmania to Sydney while out and spending time in Australia with a crew that I never met. And I still hold 2 club records from my old swimming club from when I was 16. If you can have a think.
Wait, so you were actually a swimmer when you were younger?
Yes,
That is
I was a swimmer, yeah.
Okay. See, they're all very, I'd say you don't still have the swimming record.
Okay.
And the sailing thing is true.
Yeah.
And the prince thing is true. Am I wrong?
That is incorrect.
Which one's the lie?
The sailing from Tasmania to Sydney is a lie. That wasn't me. That was my best mate who just came back from that side of the world, who sailed from Tasmania to Sydney in a crew that he never met, and I still slag him for how dangerous that was.
Oh, fair enough.
But yeah, no, I still hold club records somehow, and I was the lead Prince
What
Charming.
was your
breaststroke?
Oh,
And the medley, we had a relay record, which still stands.
Fair enough. No, mine. So basically, I tried to make mine hard, but when I made, so mine is not boring. Not boring. Mine is not interesting. So it's 3 sports, and I've said I played them, and then you have to guess which one I haven't played. So I played lacrosse on the team, I played ice hockey on a team, and I played basketball on a team.
I'm gonna say ice hockey just because that seems very out there.
Well, that's the lie.
Yeah, I don't think you've played ice hockey.
I will have you know that is true.
Really? Wow,
Yeah.
that's cool.
That is true.
Play ice hockey.
I played it. I played it in Saudi Arabia and Egypt with a lot of Canadians.
Wow.
So yeah.
I just thought there's so much ice needed for ice hockey. There's no way Egypt has that level of
No, to be fair, when I started it was like a Canadian community who started it. So yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. See, mine was now that I've heard yours, I feel really bad for the way I've prepped for mine.
You gave me 30 seconds to make mine as well.
I know. No, but the thing is, I thought that would be challenging. But yeah. I have not played lacrosse though.
Okay.
I've tried it like once, but I've not played it as part of a team. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting sport.
Yeah. All right, Jack. Thank you so much for coming today, and sharing your journey, and giving advice to anyone who wants to be involved in para sport. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what the next 4 years hold for wheelchair rugby.
Thank you for having me.